Okay guys, so in this video I'm going to show you flip. And flip is a technique that I first was introduced to by Paul Lewis at Google. He's an absolute delight and a genius, and I thought I'll try to show you kind of the basics of how it works and when to use it. So one of the things that you will find yourself wanting to do a lot is to move elements around on the page or things of that nature. And as good front-end developers, we know that using width and height and top and left and all of these positioning types of properties to move around elements is a big no-no. Ideally, what you want is to only use opacity and transform, because those are the only two properties as of right now that leverages the GPU layer. Therefore, anything that you do with these is going to make a much smoother experience for the user. But and I mean, for moving things around, it's pretty easy because animating something that just moves around can be done with just a Translate 3D where you just kind of move things around. But what happens if you want to do this? What happens if you want to do something like this where you make something full screen? Well, this is a bit trickier because now you're not just moving things, you're changing the dimensions of the element. So let's look at how traditionally people would do this. So here we have our HTML and a little bit of CSS. I'll just really quickly show you the CSS. It's very basic, as you see. This is our little white div there. And then we have this full screen property where we set the width and the height and the positioning a la traditional style. And then basically what's happening is that we have an event listener for the click event, and when we click, basically we request an animation frame, and then we toggle the full screen class on and off, and that's what's growing this element. So what is the issue here? Well, the issue is that on a heavy page or a device that isn't all that performant, this is actually going to be very unperformant because, as stated earlier, we're using all the properties that we're not supposed to be using because this is forcing re-renders and a lot of heavy. It becomes heavy for the browser. So how can we do something a little bit better? Well, this is where Flip comes in. So now we're on our second tab, and here we have an animation. It looks pretty much exactly the same, but with one major difference. This is using the flip technique. And the flip technique only leverages transform and, well, basically only transform, which is great because it's on the GPU layer. So how could we possibly achieve this? Well, we're going to walk through all of this code in just a moment, but first I'll just show you some basic CSS. This is basically the same styles, and here we see that we have something called animate. And all that does is that it adds when we add this animate class, all it does is that it sets transition all 0.5 seconds and easy in out to whatever element it's using. And then we have this full screen thing we saw earlier that was a big no-no. But you see, when we use flip, there's a little bit of a twist to it. So let's walk through this. So we're grabbing the box element, the white box that we saw earlier, and when we click, what we do is that we remove the animate class on this element if it's there. Well, we're just going to remove it because what we don't want is to animate anything at this point in time. So the first thing we want to now do is to grab the dimensions of the element. In other words, we do get bounding client rect. And what happens now is that we have an object that contains all the position and dimension information of the element. And then we toggle full screen on and off, because if we are in our start position, like this, we toggle on the full screen or we toggle off the full screen, okay? So on and off, and then we get the end dimensions. In other words, what's just happened is that we removed the animation so that it doesn't animate, and then we grab the start dimensions of the element, we add the full screen so that we make the box, let's say if we're in the start position, then we expand the box all the way out to the full screen, and then we grab the dimensions when it's in that expanded position. We can actually see this if we take a look at our little console here. So when I click here, you can see that we're actually grabbing the start information and the end information. So every time we're simply logging out the start and the finish position information of the box. So why is that important? Well, this is where it gets really fancy. So what we now do is that we get the delta, or the difference between our start and our finish, and then we divide these same values to get the scaling information, and then finally we add a transform property, an inline translate 3D, with all of these values, and we add the scale. So what now happens is that when we do this, and this is all happening on one single, well, basically one single frame, or at least so quickly that we humans can perceive it. What's happening is that we are expanding the box to full screen, or rather, first we grab the dimensions, so we know the start, and then we expand the box to full screen, grab those dimensions, and then we use transform to scale everything back so it looks like it was we have the element in the start position. But in reality, what we're doing is that we're using translate 3D in order to make it look like we haven't done anything at all. And then we get a request animation frame, and we add the animate property, because remember, if we add the animate, there's going to be a transition. And when we then remove, or we basically remove all of this translate information here, in other words, we are removing the scaling information and the translate 3D from our transform property, then the animation is going to flow just basically back to it's going to expand if we're in the full screen mode, and it's going to do it all using the transform. So what we're seeing here is that we are leveraging the fact that the browser can execute all of this and apply all these styles without the user even being able to perceive that we have actually expanded the whole box and then shrunk it down using transforms, and then we simply remove the transform, and then the animation runs smoothly. And this is the basics of Flip. And you can apply this to much more complicated and elaborate things than this, but I think that this is a really powerful technique to know about if you are making any type of animation that requires you to move around elements and change their dimensions. So have a great day.